In the year 2048, the Earth is overpopulated and on the brink of collapse, having lost access to nearly all natural resources. The government initiates a bold program to genetically modify 14 soldiers and send them to Titan, Saturn's moon, to establish a new civilization. These volunteers and their families are relocated to a specially built neighborhood, where they are provided with luxurious, technologically advanced homes. Rick, a former pilot, is one of the selected volunteers. He moves with his wife Abigail, a doctor, and their son Lucas. The program's head, Dr. Collingwood, has high hopes for Rick's success. Rick has proven his resilience. During his time in the Air Force, he was shot down and forced to cross the Syrian desert, injured and alone, surviving for 3 days without food or water. Both Rick and Abigail are undertaking this journey for their son, wanting to secure a future for him. However, Abigail admits to Collingwood that she's concerned about the potential health risks for Rick. Collingwood reassures her that while Rick may experience some illness, proper aftercare will prevent anything serious. Once all the volunteers have settled into their new lives, they gather for a briefing to begin their treatment. Collingwood gives a presentation about the program's objectives, explaining that the Earth is no longer habitable, and Titan is humanity's best chance for survival. Titan has an atmosphere and primordial ecosystem, but it's harsh. Liquid methane rains down into vast oceans and lakes they cannot swim in, and the atmosphere is too rich in nitrogen for humans to breathe. It is simply too cold to survive there without help. Instead of terraforming, the decision is made to genetically modify humans to adapt to Titan's extreme conditions. One volunteer expresses concern about the safety of these modifications and whether their bodies will reject the treatment. Collingwood assures them that the clinical trials were successful, but he admits that there is no guarantee that everyone will survive the procedure. Despite the uncertainty, the volunteer persists in questioning the program, but Rick steps in, telling him to leave if he has doubts. The volunteers come from diverse backgrounds and were chosen for their ability to survive extreme circumstances. After the meeting, they are given card keys for full access to the base and escorted to the lab for their first injection of the 300 treatments they will undergo in the coming weeks. Dr. Freya explains the purpose of each shot, but Rick only understands part of the explanation. Life in the new neighborhood becomes a routine, though nothing out of the ordinary. Lucas attends school, Abigail manages the household, and when she has the time, she sits with Rick through his treatments. The volunteers quickly form strong bonds, often socializing outside the base. Being neighbors allows them to throw dinner parties and barbecues regularly. At times, the conversations take a darker turn. One volunteer confesses his fear that, after the 2 years on Titan they've agreed to, they may never be allowed to return. One evening, their barbecue becomes a little livelier than usual, as it marks the last time they are allowed to drink alcohol before heading to Titan. After a few drinks, Abigail feels dizzy, so Rick helps her upstairs. However, it is Rick who soon starts feeling unwell, coughing violently and struggling to breathe. Abigail checks on him and realizes he has a fever. She immediately rushes him to their bedroom, administers medicine, and stays by his side through the night. A few days later, Collingwood is pleased with the progress of the volunteers' DNA modifications, signaling that it's time for a significant test. The group is asked to spend an extended period underwater without oxygen tanks. After 30 minutes, only Rick and Tally remain, turning it into a friendly competition. Tally lasts 39 minutes, but Rick stays submerged so comfortably that he begins swimming in the pool. What shocks everyone is that Rick isn't swimming like an ordinary human. He moves at incredible speed, gliding through the water like a dolphin. Later that evening, he shows off his newfound swimming ability to Lucas in the garden pool. Afterward, Rick tucks Lucas into bed, and the child surprises him by mentioning his late grandfather, whom he believes would have loved to see what's happening. Rick joins Abigail at the pool, and the two share an intimate moment, but Abigail pauses when she notices black veins running across Rick's body. Rick asks what's wrong, but the veins disappear quickly, and Abigail decides to ignore it for now. Days later, the volunteers undergo their first surgery. Rayanne, another volunteer's wife, visits Abigail, allowing their children to play together while she expresses her concerns. She admits that she is terrified, believing her husband doesn't belong in this program. Abigail reassures her, reminding her that the volunteers are helping to secure a future for their children and humanity. Rick comes out of the surgery in good health and returns home to spend time with his family. Abigail is relieved to see Rick recovering well, but is still troubled by the potential side effects she's read about in the manual they were given. That night, Abigail wakes up to find their bed empty. She finds Rick in the kitchen, cooling his skin with ice because he's feeling overheated. Abigail prepares a larger bucket of cold water for him, and Rick challenges her to a game. They both place their hands in the bucket, and while Abigail quickly withdraws hers due to the cold, Rick keeps his hands in, confirming that he no longer feels the cold. The next morning, they go for a run together and stop to admire a beautiful view of the area. Rick reflects on how he wishes he could have saved the planet. The testing continues, with volunteers running with masks that simulate Titan's atmosphere and swimming for long periods in freezing water. Sometimes a volunteer can't handle the stress and must stop, but Tally refuses to leave the water, even when she can barely tolerate the cold. To help her, Rick teaches her how to meditate underwater. One afternoon after testing, the volunteers shower, and Rick notices that his hair is falling out. Tally confirms that she's experiencing the same issue. Suddenly, they hear a scream and discover that one of the women is having a seizure and vomiting blood. Doctors rush to help her, but it's too late. She becomes the first casualty among the group. Later, the volunteers gather for a meeting to discuss the death. Some express their own fears about dying, while others remind them that they always knew the risks. Despite being warned not to drink, they decide to have alcohol to cope with the situation. Outside, Rayanne comforts her husband Zane, while Tally's husband Andrew helps Abigail in the kitchen. Andrew shares the story of how he and Tally met, and Tally reveals that Andrew desperately wants to start a family. When Andrew leaves to set the table, Tally admits that Andrew thinks she will leave for 2 years, get the idea out of her system, and return as a good wife. But Tally wants more than that. During dinner, Abigail notices that the volunteers' veins are occasionally turning black. Suddenly, they hear shouting from the garden. Zane is having a breakdown and attacking Rayanne. The other men rush outside to subdue Zane while Abigail takes Rayanne away. The next day, Freya arrives with extra medication to help prevent the side effects that led to the death and Zane's condition. Abigail notices that some of the doses are unusually high and asks to speak with Collingwood. However, he's unavailable. Later that evening, Rick begins throwing up blood. Abigail urges him to rest while she cleans up. When he isn't looking, she secretly takes a sample of his blood. As she moves around the house locking doors, she finally notices cameras hidden around their home, revealing that the program has been watching them. When Rick uses the pool again, he notices that his skin is peeling off, but he doesn't seem concerned. At bedtime, Abigail sees the state of Rick's skin and his hair loss, and her worry deepens. The next morning, Abigail examines Rick's blood under a microscope and discovers it's turning black. The next major procedure involves modifying the volunteer's eyes to be more like a cat's, allowing them to see in the dark. The surgery goes smoothly, but Rick must keep his eyes bandaged for a while, and his family helps him navigate the house. One night, Abigail hears Rick groaning in pain as his eyes begin to bleed. They take him to the lab for another procedure, and Abigail confronts Collingwood, telling him that something is alive inside Rick and that she knows about the cameras. Collingwood admits that the cameras were installed at the Pentagon's request for security purposes. He reassures her that Rick will recover soon, and that Zane's mental breakdown was simply due to the brain struggling with the enhanced senses. Abigail, feeling something is off, returns home. Later, she hears sirens and discovers that the army has surrounded Zane's house. She's not allowed to get close, but watches in horror as a mutated Zane throws Rayanne through the window, killing her instantly. The soldiers storm the house and shoot Zane dead. At the base, Abigail watches over Rick, only to hear more soldiers arriving. With Collingwood busy, Abigail seizes the opportunity to take Rick's card key and investigate. She hides from security, sneaks into Collingwood's office, and discovers files revealing that the volunteer's DNA is being fused with animal DNA in an attempt to create a new evolutionary step, Homo titanians. Meanwhile, Collingwood meets with Colonel Solano and NASA officials who want to shut down the program, calling it unproven science. They argue that the volunteers are becoming violent, and this is heading into dangerous territory, reminiscent of Nazi experiments. Colonel Solano insists that the experiment should be terminated, but Collingwood and his advisor point out that the ministers of defense have the final say, so they can't leave unless directed. After the meeting, Freya also urges Collingwood to stop, but he dismisses her. When Rick is sent home, Collingwood accompanies him and explains that his sight will return in 24 hours. They miscalculated the brain's capacity to handle enhanced senses, but a new surgery can fix the issue. Abigail snaps and demands the truth, and Collingwood admits they've been injecting animal DNA into the volunteers. Collingwood acknowledges that they can't guarantee success, but he insists that the risks were always understood. For Rick to survive, he must undergo this new procedure. Abigail is horrified, and after some distance, she stays quiet. A day later, Rick removes his bandages and confirms that his sight is restored. He shaves his head to avoid the bald spots. At night, Rick is amazed by his ability to see in complete darkness and calls Collingwood to confirm he will proceed with the surgery. The volunteers undergo surgery, but many complications arise, and most of them die. Only Rick and Tally survive. The next day, Abigail, Andrew, and Lucas visit Rick and Tally, shocked to see their mutated forms. They can no longer communicate through speech, but instead use tactile contact and low-frequency sounds that humans cannot hear. Rick touches the glass separating them, making Abigail cry. Her tears increase when Collingwood gives her Rick's wedding ring. Rick and Tally are soon scheduled to leave for Titan, but they're allowed to stay home for now. Rick struggles to wear human clothes, and when Abigail tries to help him, he accidentally hurts her. He tries to check on her, but Abigail, terrified, pulls away from his touch. Rick spends most of his time in the pool, feeling more at ease there than in the house. One night, after putting Lucas to bed, Abigail notices Tally entering the garden with her hand covered in blood. Rick is unconcerned and approaches Tally, where their fingers sprout strange tentacles for communication. At that moment, soldiers arrive in the neighborhood and discover Andrew's lifeless body in the shower. As they move toward Abigail's house, she retreats upstairs with Lucas. The soldiers shoot Tally with tranquilizer darts, but it takes multiple hits before she is subdued. However, she wakes up and kills one of the soldiers using her tentacles. The soldiers respond by opening fire, and Tally is killed. The soldiers then try to apprehend Rick, but he uses his enhanced strength to knock them out. He attempts to drown the last soldier in the pool, but Abigail hears the commotion and rushes to stop him. Realizing what he's done, Rick runs away. Colonel Solano orders his team to search for Rick, disregarding Collingwood's request not to kill him. Abigail and Lucas are taken to the base for safety, but Abigail escapes when she realizes Rick's location. She finds Rick at their special spot and offers her hand to show she's no longer afraid. Just as Rick's tentacles grip her wrist, the Army helicopters locate them and incapacitate them. Abigail wakes up at the base, where Collingwood explains that they had to hurt her for her own good. The Pentagon is shutting down the program, and Rick must be sent to Titan immediately. However, they can't force him, so Abigail is tasked with convincing Rick to go. Abigail is asked to give Rick a shot of quetiapine, which will erase his memories, essentially performing a chemical lobotomy. She dislikes the idea, but complies. After giving Rick the injection, she leaves the cage, only for Rick to reveal he's been faking unconsciousness. Rick kills the soldier who approaches him, and Collingwood realizes Abigail swapped the quetiapine for saline. Rick escapes, using his advantage in the dark to hide. Abigail and Freya help Rick find an alternate exit, and the family is reunited. When Collingwood orders the soldiers to open fire, Colonel Solano refuses, aiming his weapon at Collingwood instead. The other soldiers follow suit, and Collingwood is arrested. Abigail rushes to Rick's side, and in her embrace, his most precious memories are reinforced. A short time later, Abigail and Freya join the Titan II project as researchers, using ethical methods to help save the world. Meanwhile, Rick is sent to Titan, where his new body reveals wings that allow him to fly around his new home.